I want you to think about something that makes you really mad. Take a second. What is one thing that drives you crazy? You got it? I know for me it only takes a few seconds, and I have a pretty exhaustive list of things that make my blood boil. Number one on my list is when people don't merge nicely on the highway. You know what I'm talking about, right? It's the person who ignores all the signs saying that the left lane is closed ahead and zooms up past everyone to cut in at the front of the line, as if they are the most important person on the road. I mean, I get so angry that I want to slide my car over in that lane to block them from moving forward, which might work if I drove an SUV or a semi, but I'm afraid my little Honda Civic would just be run over. Man, it makes my blood boil when that happens. Don't tell me if you do that, because right now I kind of like you. We all have things that make us angry, don't we? I mean, predictable things. They might be trivial, like merging or poor customer service or a polar vortex. Or they can be more serious, like being lied to or having something stolen or someone disappointing your kids. Anger is a common, predictable emotion. But is our anger ever questionable? That's exactly the type of question we're asking in the series called A Questionable Life. In this series, we're asking ourselves, is there anything about my life that would cause people to ask, who are you? Why are you doing that? The challenge is for every one of us to live a questionable life, a life that evokes curiosity, a life that sparks questions. And you probably already figured out that today we're talking about a life marked by questionable anger. Is there anything about the things that make us angry that would surprise people? Is there anything that would grab attention? Do we get angry about the kinds of things Jesus got angry about? And if not, how do we move from predictable anger to questionable anger? Understand, it's difficult to move beyond predictable anger because questionable anger often requires that I step out of my own personal experience to internalize and get fired up about someone else's pain. The reason predictable anger is predictable is because it's me getting riled up about things that directly affect me. I mean, whether the offense is large or small, most people would observe my passion and say, well, of course she's angry. I would be too if that happened to me. But questionable anger surprises people. Questionable anger makes people uncomfortable. Questionable anger evokes curiosity and it causes people to wonder. Let's just get honest with ourselves for a moment. Is there anything questionable about the anger you and I exhibit regarding poverty, where the basic needs of food and shelter and clothing go unmet, and the opportunities of education and employment are denied? Or slavery, where young children and vulnerable women are bought and sold in a worldwide underground market? Or neglect, where those with physical or mental challenges are forgotten or ignored? Or discrimination, where entire peoples are oppressed because of their ethnicity, their gender, their sexual orientation, or the color of their skin. We might look at all of those things and think, that shouldn't be. But do they really make us angry? Do they evoke a passion for justice? Do they move us to action? Have you ever heard of what is known in peacemaking circles as the dual narrative dynamic? One of the reasons it can be difficult for us to get fired up about injustice is that we typically only look through at things through the lens of our own story. Our own narrative, how we view our world, makes sense to us because we grew up in that story. And most of what we experience in life reinforces that narrative. But what if we could step out of our own narrative to understand the narrative of someone whose experience is very different than our own? On this weekend, when we celebrate the life and impact of Dr. Martin Luther King, an obvious example of the dual narrative dynamic can be seen in how events played out in Ferguson, Missouri. People on all sides of that conflict reacted with strong opinions. Chances are you had your own thoughts and I had mine. But all of us tend to view situations like Ferguson through the lens of our own story. how we grew up, the experiences we've had, the people we've known, they all shape the way that we see the world and how we make sense of it. But the dual narrative dynamic reminds us that in almost every situation, especially situations involving conflict or injustice, there are at least two narratives that people are living in. And if we open our hearts and our minds and we listen, we will discover that there are others living in the only story they've ever known. And sometimes the narrative they experience is very different than our own. Which brings us to the reason why I believe questionable anger is often difficult for us. It is simply so much easier to live in our own story than it is to try and understand and embrace the narrative of the other. But I want to suggest to you today that as followers of Jesus, we don't have that luxury. Jesus had this to say about his purpose. He said, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Jesus came to bring good news to the poor, to release those in bondage, to heal those afflicted, to set the oppressed free, and he got fired up when those things weren't happening. Perhaps the most memorable example of Jesus' questionable anger can be found in the 21st chapter of Matthew's account of his life. Here we read, "When Jesus entered Jerusalem, the whole city was stirred and asked, 'Who is this?' The crowds answered, 'This is Jesus, the prophet from Nazareth in Galilee.' Jesus entered the temple courts and he drove out all who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves. 'It is written,' he said to them, 'My house will be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a den of robbers.' The blind and the lame came to him at the temple, and he healed them. But when the chief priests and the teachers of the law saw the wonderful things he did, and the children shouting in the temple courts, 'Hosanna to the Son of David,' they were indignant. 'Do you hear what these children are saying?' they asked him." Jesus arrives at the temple in Jerusalem, and he goes on a bit of a rampage. He overturns tables. He drives out the merchants. Children are praising him, but the religious leaders, they were indignant. In John's telling of the story, they questioned Jesus, saying, "What are you doing? If God gave you the authority to do this, show us a miraculous sign to prove it." In other words, who do you think you are? Why are you doing this? That Jesus' actions evoked curiosity is a gross understatement. So what was it that made him so angry? To understand Jesus' anger, we need to understand the temple in Jesus' day. The temple was at the center of Judaism in Jesus' time. It wasn't just like a church building on the corner. It was the center of worship, of politics, and society. People would come from near and far to pray and worship God at the temple. But this very place that was intended to enable people to draw near to God had become a place of corruption and exclusion. There is a lot for Jesus to be angry about. Jesus is angry at the exploitation of the poor. Notice in verse 12 that he overturns the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves. Now, doves were the sacrifices commonly made by the poor, by those who could not afford to sacrifice a larger animal like a lamb. And Jesus accuses the temple personnel of turning this house of prayer into a den of robbers as they exploit the disadvantaged, presumably through upcharges and temple taxes. Jesus enters into the narrative of the poor, and he's angry. Jesus is angry that a flurry of religious activity is crowding out the Gentiles' right to worship. Understand, the structure of the temple itself reflected a segregated system, with each area delineating who's in and who's out. The temple was a building comprised of concentric courts, and there were very strict rules about who was allowed beyond certain walls and who wasn't. The first court, the outer court, the one where Jesus entered and cleared the tables, this was called the court of Gentiles. If you weren't a Jew, you could worship in here, but you couldn't go any further. The next court in was the court of women. If you were a Jew, you could worship in here, but if you weren't a male Jew, you couldn't go any further. I mean, just try to imagine what this would be like today. I mean, imagine if you arrived at a community Christian church location and we declared, only the men are allowed to sit up here in the seats, and the women, you're allowed to stand in the back. Now, if you weren't born into a family with Christian parents, you can come, but you have to remain out in the hallway. And if you're a Packers fan, sorry, we're going to have to ask you to stay outside in the parking lot. In Mark's account of this story, Jesus says, "My temple will be called a house of prayer for all nations." For all nations. Yet, as the Gentiles arrived at the temple, the one place set aside for them to pray has become a den of robbers. Scholar Michael Wilkins writes, "They are robbing God of the means by which his blessing extends to all nations. The temple's primary purpose is being lost in a frenzy of religious activity." Jesus enters into the narrative of those being denied their rights, and he's angry. Jesus is also angry that an entire group of people is being neglected and excluded. Here's a detail in Matthew's version of the story that I had never noticed before. Notice what happens directly after Jesus overturns the tables. The blind and the lame came to him at the temple, and he healed them. Understand, up to this point, the blind and the lame were restricted from full access to temple activities. You see, people believed that physical disability somehow made a person impure, and nothing impure could come into the presence of God. So they were excluded. An entire group of people left on the outside looking in through no fault of their own, until Jesus steps in. Theologian N.T. Wright says, "The people who had been kept out were now welcomed in. The people who had been scorned were now healed." It was an action full of significance. It summed up everything Jesus had been doing throughout his ministry. Jesus enters into the narrative of the suffering, the neglected, the excluded, and he's angry. As we think about Jesus at this moment in the temple, there's a question I think every one of us needs to ask ourselves. Do I get angry at the kinds of things that made Jesus angry? Do I respond in ways that Jesus responded? You see, how we respond to injustice may reveal our Christ-likeness perhaps more than anything else. Do we enter into the narratives of the poor, those denied their rights, the suffering, the neglected, the excluded? Or are we so stuck in our own story that the only thing that raises our temperature is getting cut off in traffic or slow internet speeds or a bad call in a Bulls game? Maybe you're like me. As I came to realize the difference between my predictable anger and Jesus' questionable anger, I immediately wanted to know what to do. I mean, how do I begin to experience questionable anger? Well, I think one important step we can all take is to make an intentional decision to enter into the narratives of others, to engage in areas of poverty and justice that are present in our neighborhoods, our cities, and our world. Here at Community, we've embraced a philosophy that there are 3 ways to respond to and engage poverty and injustice. And we feel all 3 ways are essential to a comprehensive response. We call it a 3-level strategy. The strategy embodies 3 levels of community impact that we hope to have as a church, as a community of Christ followers. Level 1 is charitable response. These are designed to meet the basic needs, often through handouts. I mean, this type of response can be done from a distance, and the results are immediate and temporary. Examples might be food or clothing drives, or collecting Christmas gifts or school supplies. For example, this past Christmas, Community sponsored 4 gift marts serving 8 schools in East Aurora and Joliet. 13,000 gifts were collected. $18,500 was raised for local schools. 4,500 people were served. I mean, it was phenomenal. And these level 1 responses, they are so important. They meet real needs. But we can't stop there. Level 2 is individual development. These are designed to equip people to meet their own needs. They require building a relationship. Results take longer to achieve, but they are often longer lasting. Examples include tutoring, or mentoring, or child sponsorship, teaching job skills, running a food co-op, or a community garden. Danita attends our community's Naperville Yellow Box campus. She's been involved in a level 2 experience mentoring a child in East Aurora, and we asked her to share her story. Here's what she wrote. She says, "I spent some time today with the child I mentor and had some amazing experiences. First of all, I wanted to surprise him by bringing him a donut from the bakery around the corner from the school. I brought him over to the table and he had this humongous, delicious-looking donut waiting for him. And I was quickly kicked into reality when he asked me what it was. He had never had a donut before and was actually hesitant to try it. I told him it tasted sweet like candy, and a couple minutes later, it was gone. He had the biggest smile on his face, and I was happy and excited to be able to share this new experience with him. But my heart was sad and happy at the same time. The things we often take for granted, silly things, even like donuts, are not to be had by all. This mentoring thing brings me such blessings. This little guy is awesome, and I'm proud to be able to help him grow, as he seems to be doing for me, too." That's level 2. Level 3 is community development and advocacy. These activities are designed to address societal systems and structures that prevent people from breaking out of poverty or developing their full potential. They require long-term investments, and results happen slowly, but they are by far the most far-reaching, the most impactful. Examples include providing microfinance loans for startup businesses, or relocating a business to a low-income community, advocating for educational funding reform or mixed-income housing communities, maybe serving on a local school board or city council. Here's a simple illustration we use about why it is necessary to move to level 3. If you were standing by the side of a river and you saw a baby float by, what would you do? Well, hopefully you'd take the baby out of the water. And if another one floated by, what would you do? Take it out of the water. But by the 4th or 5th baby, you better run upstream to figure out why so many babies are winding up in the river, because that's the problem that needs to be solved, not just taking care of the babies that wind up in the river. Addressing the root causes of poverty and injustice is what level 3 is all about. So I want to challenge each of us today to enter into the narrative of others by engaging with an area of injustice that is present in our neighborhoods or our city or our world. Maybe start with a level 1 experience. If you're already involved in a level 1 experience, then what would it look like for you to move beyond to level 2, level 3? Here are some examples from around community of these experiences. Perhaps you can mentor a child, just like Danita, through our partnership with Kids Hope in East Aurora, and enter into the narrative of a child who's growing up in an under-resourced community. Perhaps you could spend time with the residents of the All-American Nursing Home through our Edgewater campus and enter into the narrative of a forgotten group of precious people, many of whom who are struggling with mental illness. Or maybe go on a mission trip to the Philippines with our partner Frontline Ministries and enter into the narrative of children who are living on the streets in deplorable conditions. You see, when we make the intentional decision to enter the narratives of others, God will begin to do a work in us. And I believe that God has something for each one of us to get angry about. We may have to expose ourselves to a number of different things to find it. But I believe that we will find our passion when we feel our anger. Let me say that again. We will find our passion when we feel our anger. God has something for each one of us to get angry about. Jesus came to bring good news to the poor, to release those in bondage, to heal those afflicted, to set the oppressed free. His mission on this earth was to restore those things that were broken back to what God desired them to be. Jesus turned a bright light on injustice that had for so long lived in the shadows. And as he did, people asked, "Who are you? Why are you doing that?" As a church, we believe the mission of Jesus is our mission as well. And it starts with each one of us making the decision today that we are going to enter into the narratives of others and engage issues of injustice at level 1, level 2, and level 3. We need to be people who turn a bright light on the things hidden in the shadows of our world. We need to get fired up about the things that matter, and as we do, we'll become a community marked by questionable anger. People may ask, "Who are you? Why are you doing that?" And then we'll be able to share the story of Jesus and his questionable anger. May you and may I live lives that evoke curiosity. May we live lives that spark questions. May we live a questionable life.